Hi, everybody. It's Ostrowski back with the Liberty Moving podcast, and we're doing a whole series of episodes on called Dr. Ostrowski's Political Class. I'm going to go through my 7 books and sort of outline everything that I have discovered in 50 years of politics that has any relevance to the Liberty Movement, which is actually plenty. Before I get on to today's topic, which is judicial politics, so that's going to be a wild ride, believe me. So there was a little bit of a section I kind of didn't get into, and concerning like why government grows, and I like checklists because I think it shows sort of a logical way of thinking, putting things in categories and so on. So in Political Class Dismissed, Chapter 3, I have a list of the 5 main reasons why government tends to grow. One is rational apathy. Rational apathy means that whereas the machine has an incentive to get involved in politics, the average person does not, because the amount of effort it would take compared to the likelihood of accomplishing anything is so small, and that's why most people don't get involved. Important concept to understand. The government control over political ideas, which is even stronger today than it's really ever been. Government creates its own demand. In other words, government causes problems and then goes out and tells people, well, we're the solution to this problem. The productivity of the mixed economy, what I mean by that is that because the average person in the United States is not like in dire poverty, there's sort of comfortable enough so that they don't really want to hit the streets and protest, although that's beginning to actually change as we decline ever further. There will be that kind of a distress among the population. And basically, finally, obviously, government has a monopoly on the use of force. And I think Hoppe pointed this out, among other thinkers, that if you have a monopoly on something, what are you going to do with it? You're going to use it to make your own situation better. And that's basically what government does. The government's constantly expanding. But what I want to get into today is the whole concept of judicial politics, which most people in the libertarian movement do not really focus on in this, but I kind of do because this is what I do. I'm a trial lawyer, and I know a lot about the courts. My father was a judge for 30 years. So I can't emphasize enough that this podcast and just distilling it and summarizing it doesn't do justice to the book. I'm just trying to give people the benefit of the outline of the lessons I've learned, but really go get the book. It's like $5 on Kindle, and you can go through all of this. And this stuff is mostly, it's either original or it's original application of old ideas. Well worth it. So I'm almost through chapter 3. It's the biggest chapter I've ever written. I have a long chapter about Lincoln, I think, coming up later in the book. But once we get through this chapter, and I think I'll have this and one more podcast on chapter 3, things are going to go a lot quicker. So Rothbard said that classical liberals didn't go far. Didn't go far enough as they left the state in charge of the command posts of society: the courts, roads, police, and the army. Now, there's a lot of naivete among the professorial class about how courts operate. They talk about the rule of law and an independent judiciary as alleged realized values in American law, in contrast to banana republics. My response is, really, Professor? Have you ever been inside an American courtroom? Judges are selected by the political class, and they tend to serve their masters well. Why would anybody think differently? Why does anyone even think that government courts are capable of dispensing justice? The emperor has no clothes. I asked the question that most lawyers and professors, are not comfortable asking. This is a question that's rarely posed, but I do answer it. I do address it in the chapter, and it's also going to be the subject of my final book about politics, which I hope to have out maybe about a year and a half. I've got one book lined up before that one. So this is a question that's rarely asked and never answered, as far as I know. I wrote about this because I'd been the subject of a crazy civil contempt case in federal court, which ended up with me and my father walking into the FBI and asking them to investigate. And instead, they tipped off the suspects and put my life in danger. Thanks, FBI. I like to call it the FIB, fib. So, Professor, what were you saying about the rule of law? So, but enough about me. Let's talk about so-called American justice. We are told that American courts can do justice, and without them, we would have dispute resolution that would quickly lead to violence in the streets. Always keep in mind that the fallacy of utopianism always lies just beneath the surface of almost every political debate in every issue. As I demonstrate in the book, peaceful justice is more of a prayer than a reality. The first problem is, how can government courts impartially adjudicate disputes when the government itself is a party, which it often is? In my opinion, it can't, which is why courts generally allow governments to grow over time and in spite of various constitutional provisions designed to limit government growth. By the way, my law professor, Hank Holzer, has a nice book on the sweet land of liberty. Talks about case after case where you would think that the Constitution meant one thing, but that would have shrunk government a little bit, so they went the other way. And this is an issue I'm going to address. I have addressed, but will address in the podcast when I get to progressivism and primer. Courts, like any other government agency, are subject to special interest group pressures. That is because groups that tend to litigate more tend to pay much more attention to who becomes a judge. Judicial politics is a rich man's sport, and you will often find that some judge, whether elected or appointed, had a wealthy patron who ushered his nomination along. The political class controls the courts, the police, and the prosecutors, so they get an extra layer of immunity from prosecution or bad rulings from judges. These are fairly obvious points, but digging deeper, why do we think that government judges will be able to define or identify just principles and apply them? Again, this is more of a dream than a reality. In reality, corruption, bribery, and favoritism regularly plague the courts, and the book is filled with examples. Even highly respected Judge Matt Jason publicly commented that many judges were, quote, result-oriented, as opposed to applying neutral principles of justice to the facts. And the notion that the government somehow magically resolves disputes without violence is one of the greatest lies of all time. One of the greatest lies of all time. Violence is its main tool and is used millions of times each year in our so-called peaceful justice system. Hundreds of people are killed by police officers each year. I pointed this out 16 years before George Floyd, by the way. I cited a Human Rights Watch report about pervasive police brutality across the country. Now, to be fair, I also point out that suspects use violence against cops tens of thousands of times each year, and they kill over 100 cops each year. My point is, the government has not eliminated violence from the dispute resolution process. It has most likely increased it, since it operates as a monopoly largely immune from legal redress. Go pound salt, Thomas Hobbes. And this is an issue that I'll be addressing really as the podcasts go on, as the books go on, and as my new books come out. The state as conflict generator. So we're told that, well, we need the state to resolve conflicts. Well, that's interesting because the state is a conflict generator. The state is constantly creating conflicts that wouldn't exist unless we had a state. And I don't think this is an issue that's been addressed, which is why I'm going to write a book about it. It's even worse than the fact that they have not eliminated violence. We were promised that if we gave the government a monopoly of justice, that disputes would be resolved without great social upheaval and massive violence. I'm not talking here. I'm drawing a distinction here between violence that's sort of part of the justice system itself, and then violence, which is a reaction to the failure of the justice system. This is not, it's not true, as I prove in the book, with all sorts of examples. And wasn't I a pioneer in this area? And didn't I anticipate the events of 2020 way back in 2004? And I'm talking about riots that happen when there's dissatisfaction with the court system. Well, whose fault is that? It doesn't matter whose fault it is. We were told by Hobbes and Locke and all these other people and all the professors and all their intellectual apologists that if we have the state, we'll have a sort of a civilized way of solving disputes. We weren't told there was going to be mass violence and rioting almost every time the state, got a verdict wrong. If we were told that, we might have said, well, is this the best that we can do? This is my point. And again, why should you listen to my podcast? Watch my podcast? Where else are you hearing any of these ideas? The consistently discussed critical issues not addressed properly, discussed on a daily basis, one after another. Every podcast, there's numerous issues that I think are illuminated by the podcast, and you're not hearing this anywhere else. I'm not criticizing anybody else. There's lots of podcasts that do things that I don't do. And I listen to them and I watch them, whatever. I listen to Tom Woods. I don't watch him. It's just audio. But this podcast is giving you a hell of a lot of material you're not getting anywhere else. And that's why you should listen to it, subscribe. If you want to support what I'm doing, buy my books. I don't ask for donations. I ask for a free market transaction of these 7 books that have all gotten great reviews. I've heard virtually no criticism from anybody who actually, I think, read the books. So I'm going to go here, and I'm sort of famous last words, going to close it out with a couple passages from the book that really, frankly, I just thought I would read. There we go. We lost the page. Read them into the record because I can't really summarize them. So it's from page 78. So many episodes of social violence have resulted from a perception that government, courts, or law enforcement officers have not resolved disputes fairly or protected citizens adequately. In 1992, there was an acquittal in a criminal trial. The riot resulted in 54 persons killed, over 2,000 injured, over 13,000 arrests, and 11,000 fires. I think that was the Rodney King situation. A similar riot occurred in Liberty City in Florida in 1980 after a jury acquitted 4 police officers charged with homicide. The state's abject failure to resolve conflicts without the use of force by itself, by litigants, and by their sympathizers in the community is rarely acknowledged. Thus, the state does not assure that disputes will be resolved justly and without using force. Many scholars define war as a conflict resulting in at least 1,000 combat deaths. By that measure, the United States justice system, the world's most highly touted, has a war every 2 years. Every 2 years. All told, the number of people killed or injured as a result of the state's enforcement of its laws is truly enormous. This is far from the civilized, peaceful, and orderly system of schoolboy legend. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to know what's happening now, read what I wrote 15 years ago. What else can I say? I nailed it. And just sort of getting to the going back to the contempt case, because let's face it, the reason I wrote this whole critique of the American justice system is because I had seen it myself, and I said, I don't want to just talk about my own situation, but like, what is wrong with this system? There's got to be something wrong with it other than I got screwed in it. And and there is. It's more systematic than that. It's more structural. So here's how I sort of ended up this particular section, and then we'll close it out for the day. And then the next time we're going to We're going to finish chapter 3 with a little bit of summary. I'll talk a little bit about the movement that came out of this book. And then we'll go on to the next chapters. So this is directly from the book, Political Class Dismissed. Federal court put me on trial, and I had no choice but to submit because I had no influence over their court. Federal court put me on trial and caused me to spend an enormous amount of time, energy, and money defending myself. My personal and family life was disrupted, and my law practice was severely damaged. There were many sleepless nights. I was forced to read drivel from a third-rate judge attacking my father, one of the finest lawyers Buffalo has ever produced. I was defamed behind my back by cowards. In this essay, I have turned the tables around. I have put the federal court on trial. They too will be tried in a court they cannot control, the court of public opinion. Can you fight City Hall? I think you can, but if you fight City Hall in City Hall, you're bound to lose. Fight them on your own terms, on your own turf, and in a manner and time of your own choosing. I did. The pen is mightier than the gavel. So, ladies and gentlemen, in that chapter, which I've only hinted at here, I have refuted the argument that government courts do justice and do so peacefully. Where's my National Book Award?